Hello, this is Heather Hoffman. Today I have a sweet little trio of neutral cards using craft, vellum, and white heat embossing. I'm using 3 different Lisa Glanz stamp sets from Unity and a sentiment kit from June 2018 called Every Single Day. The 3 stamp sets I'm using are Fall Breeze, Bright Leaves, that's on this first one. The next one uses Wishing and Wishing, and the final one uses Special Delivery Mouse. So I kind of fiddled around here trying to get a layout I was content with. I'd already picked my sentiments and images to pair up, and I've pre-trimmed my vellum down to the right size for my card fronts. I ran my powder tool over the vellum before I stamped with clear embossing ink. This will make sure that the embossing powder only sticks on the images, not other places on the vellum that you don't want it. And then I'll very thoroughly cover it with my white embossing powder before heat setting. Now I know a lot of people have trouble with vellum warping a little bit when you heat emboss, and there's a few different ways you can help prevent this from happening. The first one is make sure and use a good quality vellum. This one is from Simon Says, and it's thick enough to be sturdy enough to hold up to the heat embossing, but it's still nice and pretty and sheer, and you can still see through it like you want to with vellum. The second thing is to make sure and use a good quality heat gun, and I like to preheat it a little bit before I heat set my image. That way I know that by the time I put it on there, it's going to work quickly and I won't have to hold it on any longer than I need to, which leads me to the third tip. Once you've preheated it, only use your heat gun over those images just long enough to melt the embossing powder. If you hold them on any longer, you are going to overheat and warp that vellum. So if you preheat your gun, just make sure you carefully watch and just go over those images just as long as you need to. I notice the vellum seems to heat up fairly quickly, and as long as you don't spend any extra time, it seems to work fairly well for me, and I really love the look of heat embossing on vellum, especially white, but I love gold or black or silver and just about anything. So those are fun tips to help make that work a little bit better. All right, now that I have all my images and sentiments stamped, I'm going to move on to preparing my background. And they all looked lovely just on plain craft cardstock, but I wanted them to pop a little extra. So I pulled out some distress inks. I used antique linen and vintage photo. And I started with antique linen and just kind of went around the outside of the image roughly. The vellum's going to cover most of it, so you don't have to go over the whole thing, but I kind of just blended it in. And then I used the darker vintage photo just to go around and kind of hit the outside edges to provide a little depth and variation in the color. Now you can see how it looks there on top of the card, and I thought it needed just a little more, so I decided to add some white paint splatters. I like to pull a little flat box out to protect my desk area. And this is just inexpensive white acrylic paint. I like to mix it about half and half with water and keep it in a small bottle in my desk. And then I can pull it out and add my splatters kind of whenever I want to add them. And you can play with different levels of that, but about equal parts seems to work fairly well for me. But you might like it a little thicker or a little thinner. So now I finished those 3 backgrounds. I set them aside and let them dry really thoroughly, especially with that paint on there. I didn't want that to smear. And since vellum will show adhesive through, you can just adhere these directly, but I don't like the adhesive to show. So a lot of times I'll use my sewing machine to attach them together, just add a row of machine stitching. On these I used a small stapler from Ranger. It's a tiny attacher, and I just stapled all 4 corners to hold it together. Then one final touch before attaching it to my card bases, I wanted to add a little thin white border just to help it pop and provide some difference between the darker craft that I use the distress ink on and the craft card base. And it also helps that white heat embossing just to stand out a little bit more as well. There you go, another fun way to use some detailed, intricate images without being intimidated by needing to color them, and it really showcases them well. Thanks so much for coming by. Have a wonderful day.